Good evening, and welcome to this very special rescheduled edition of the Silmarillion Film Project. This is session 5,032,000,032, I think.
Something like that.
We have these numbers on the that Curry is projecting, but they mean nothing to me. Oh, I guess it means it's season 5. But
Season
we
5.
seriously have we done 32 sessions for season 5?
For season 5, yeah.
Oh my
Which
God.
means I think I still don't know the total number of film sessions that we've done,
A lot.
but it's like 150 by now, isn't it? Something
Yeah.
like that? At
Could
least.
be. I could probably find out for you while you're doing your announcements.
Right, because the earlier episodes or the earlier seasons were a little shorter. It's the last two that have gotten seriously out of hand. Yeah, as far as the sessions are concerned. Yeah, a little bit. But
Anyway, we're here.
here we
And,
are.
Just a reminder: this is now this thing that began as a lowly podcast is now a live stream,
Oh
complete
yeah,
with video.
we're so sophisticated now. It's not even funny.
We're allowing you into our homes.
That's it. So, so yeah, tonight is tonight we're doing the romance tonight. It is the high romance episode this evening. The first of all of the elf human romances. Which, I never actually thought of that before. Like, it never actually even once occurred to me. Andreth and Aegnor are always an outlier, in Tolkien's imagination of elf human romances. Not only because it's gender reversed from the normal dynamic, but also it never occurred to me. Literally, only not until this very moment did I ever really process the fact that Andreth and Aegnor are the first romantic connection between elves and humans. I don't know why that never occurred to me before, but it never did. And it's really interesting that the very first human-elf romance ever is a complete failure. Now, I say it's the first ever. Of course, it's also like the last ever in the sense of, like, depending on your timeline, right? In the Middle-earth history timeline, it's the first. In the Tolkien composition timeline, it's pretty close to the last. The only possible rival there.
I think that's why you don't appreciate you. We don't think of it as the first.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, it's one always thinks of Beren and Luthien, as the first, and among the major stories, in the published Silmarillion, it is the first. But yeah, I'm not sure whether or not the romance between Andreth and Aegnor was written last, or whether the sort of non-romance of Prince Imrahil's ancestors was written last. Those were both really late. The kind of his sort of backstory of how elven blood got into the line of Dol Amroth, which is, I don't know, a little like uncertain. I've just been rereading Unfinished Tales because the audiobook just came out. Oh, finally, a normal, legal, unabridged audiobook of Unfinished Tales is such a relief. Anyway, so yeah, I was so excited when that was announced just a little while back. But anyway, so I've been reading it again through the new audiobook, and just got to that like yesterday, the whole story that, in the context of the Nimrodel story. And it's, his phrasing is really indefinite. Like, this maiden, probably, one of the handmaidens of Nimrodel, gets like caught up in the mountains and trapped or whatever. I don't know exactly what was wrong with her, but anyway, she was in trouble, and she gets rescued by, this human, the ancestor of Prince Imrahil, quote, and he took her to wife. And I'm like, how'd that go? Like, what does that mean exactly?
Like you do.
Like you do, right? You rescue an elf maiden in the mountains and you take her home and you marry her, I guess. Like,
Hey, Mom, look at this girl I found.
right? Can I keep her? I mean, it's really weird, right? It's there's no indication of, like, I mean, it might be a very charming love story. It really might. But then she ditches him. Like, they have 2 kids, and then she's like, I'm out. And she just leaves. Anyway, it's a weird non-romance story that I never really quite know what to do with. But anyway, we're not here to talk about that story. We're here to talk about Andreth and Aegnor, also a very late, strange, failed romance story. Tolkien was really into failed romance stories in his later years. As again, been reading Unfinished Tales, just read Aldarion and Arendis again also recently, and was like, man, that is a dark romance story. But anyhow, so that's what we're talking about tonight. But before we finally get around to talking about it, a couple quick announcements. First of all, Mythmoot is coming up soon. Mythmoot starts a fortnight from today, June 24th to the 27th, down in Leesburg, Virginia. So we're going to be gathering corporeally in Leesburg, Virginia. We're also going to be meeting digitally online. It'll be a fully hybrid event, which is going to be a lot of fun. Really looking forward to that. Really looking forward to getting together with folks again, which is going to be awesome. And I should mention, of course, that we are doing another film casting and dramatic reading of a film scene. I don't know which scene we're doing. Do you know, Nick, which scene is we're going to do at Mythmoot?
This is the first I'm getting like any actual information about this. So, I mean, I can come up with ones.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
Marie and I were actually just talking about this, about what we could use, and so if we're doing a scene, then I can think of a few that might be really interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say I suspect that Marie has a plan, anyway, so yeah, Druid's Fire says, I'm not wrecking my voice for the 2nd year running. Yeah, Druid's Fire played a guttural dwarf last time, as I recall. But anyway, no, it's going to be a lot of fun. So we're gonna do another casting and dramatic reading of a film scene to be announced. Brian, you are right. Marie always has a plan. That's kind of I'm just sort of assuming Marie has a plan. Like, I don't even need to think about it because I trust Marie to have a plan. Anyway, so if you are interested, of course, you don't even have to join us in person. You can get Moot Hub or Mootcast, which are our 2 options for digital attendance. Mootcast is really for people, especially if you can't really make it synchronously all the time. You get access to the full archive of all the recordings of all the sessions, and you also, of course, can view any of the sessions live. And then Moot Hub is for the full participation, over the course of that whole weekend, and access to all the things. And then, of course, there is the full corporeal attendance, which is really cool. What do you think about Dave? See, I'm trying that out because I decided, like, people keep saying live, like it's a live event as opposed to a digital event, but that's totally not a good term for it because, like, if you're attending it online,
as opposed to a dead event,
right? Exactly. Well, it's still live, right? I mean, like, this is a live session, despite the fact that we're not all in the same room, right? So it's totally not. So I'm like, I need a better word. So I'm trying out corporeal. Right?
Yeah, I think that's great, and it's way better than like in person.
In person, yeah. Like that's you,
too mundane.
Yeah, you need a word. You need like a single word, not a phrase, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's corporeal attendance and digital attendance. That's what I'm kind of trying that out. We're seeing how that goes.
I'm trying to think if there's a more Tolkienish word, but I can't come up with one yet.
Yeah, incarnate is a little too intense. I think. But it's the only other one I could come up with. But anyway, Okay, and also, yes, don't forget about our Signum clubs, our extracurricular program for grades 3 through 12. Those are great. We're having a couple new kids joining. My son is doing Old English, doing Old English club. He's been learning Old English, which is a lot of fun. Got a couple new kids joining his club this week. It's a lot of fun. So definitely invite folks to look into that. And final announcement, remember, the voting for the casting is now open. Our very next session, we because of Mythmoot, we're skipping a session. So our next session won't be until July 1st, Thursday, July 1st. But on that day, we are going to be discussing the casting. So cast your vote by June 27th. For the season 5 cast. The nominees are in and casting is open. So go to forums.signumuniversity.org and go to the Film Forum season 5 casting, and you'll be able to cast your votes there. All right. Now, off we go. Episode 9, A Brief Flame. Alluding not only to the romance, but also to the life of mortal men, I assume, Nick, right? And the kind of the emphasis on the brevity of human life in a context of, this sort of interspecies romance here. Okay, so we're 2 to 3 years. So we have, we're starting with the House of Beor now settled in Ladros, and they've been there for 2 years, right?
Yeah. I don't know that necessarily they've been there for 2 years. So what I would say is that
because they were traveling.
Right. They traveled here from Nargothrond, which is quite a ways to travel with your entire civilization.
Right.
In addition to that, while we ended episode 8 with them leaving Nargothrond, there's a good chance that there was a time period between the time where they decided to leave and the time they actually left.
Right. Okay.
So between those two time periods, I would say this is an indefinite amount of time after that decision was made, but less than 3 years.
Okay. All right. So, but basically we're going to be looking at an established settlement up in Ladros, right? So they're will there be signs of them still settling in? What kinds of hang on a second. Let me hold these questions so we actually get to the A plot. Let me finish the summary here first. So that's when we are. Our A plot, of course, as I've mentioned, is Andreth and Aegnor meeting and falling in love. The B plot, Maedhros constructing secret tunnels within the mountain of Himring with the help of the dwarves of Belagost. So we've got some defensive construction going on out there on the eastern front. And then the C plot is Fingolfin calling the council in Dorthonion to discuss the siege. So we're having that C plot is basically like the beginning of the final stretch of the season as far as the big picture, working our way towards the breaking of the siege at the end.
Both the B and C plots are related to that, because the B plot is basically big setup for how we're going to end Himring's assault in the Dagor Bragollach, because we needed some ways to get the orcs to retreat outside of siege range of Himring, so that it was no longer besieged by the time we got to the end of the episode, because we wanted at least somebody's day to end on a good note.
Right. Okay. And I like the fact that while the romance is happening, we're beginning to get these stirrings, these kind of reminders that the overall Beleriand plot is moving on towards, because the siege has been, it's been discussed at various points, right? Yeah. But it's just been a fact of life. I mean, the entire season so far has just been happening behind the siege. So I like the idea that we're like, let's discuss the siege and what should happen in the future to begin to orient people towards the fact that this is not just a framework, that's going to be up forever.
Almost all of the action that has taken place so far has taken place behind the lines.
Right.
We haven't spent a lot of time at Himring or at Minas Tirith or at Barad Ethel. There's been some time spent up there. Hodor spent some time up there, right?
Right.
But almost everything that's happened thus far has happened either south of the March of Mithros or over on the other side, south of Minas Tirith.
Right. Right. Okay. And yeah, so that how no. Well, okay. I was going to ask you about the council, but we'll get there. We'll get there. All right. Okay. And then the frame, which we may or not get to, and we're way behind on the frame anyway. So let's not worry about the frame just now.
We actually had to have a special session just to work out the frame for episodes 11 through 13. So mostly because we had so much that had been added to what the frame was trying to do that we really wanted to see how the end of the season was shaping up before we started making decisions about where things were going to happen in the frame. And it's a good thing we did, because I feel like had we not done it that way, that we would have wound up locked into some decisions that were not great.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay. Cool. All right. Back to the A plot now. So what I was asking was, in Ladros, how settled are they? To what extent I'm trying to, I always like to kind of get the scene set in my head, right, as we begin. Yeah. Are we going to be drawing attention to the fact that this is still a recent settlement? Is there still construction happening, for instance? Are we still seeing how far are they along in their adaptation? Like, do we still see lots of like soft-handed people clumsily doing things they're not good at yet, or like where are we with that?
So it's important to note that Andreth is meeting Aegnor for the very first time, right? So they can't have been there that long. Yes, elves are. It's not going to occur to them to be like, hey, maybe we should go meet our neighbors because they've been there for a few years at this point, right?
Right.
Under normal circumstances, you would expect them to have met much earlier, right?
Right. Right.
Sorry, hope I hit my mute button fast enough there. So while it can have been a while because elves, right?
Right.
It probably hasn't been super long. And so they probably are still kind of getting the hang of what they're doing. You know, they have moved from essentially living in a greenhouse for their entire lives to being on the very raggedy edge of the frontier with no real help, and the A-bros have kind of been a little slow in kind of checking in on them. So yeah, they are definitely having a rough time. It's probably not as extreme as like the first winter of the Plymouth colony. Probably not that extreme, where I think like a third of the people died in that first winter, if memory serves. But that's kind of the situation that they've been in, because they are out there all on their own trying to make it work with basically whatever knowledge they've held to. Like, think about this. All right, we've got 6 people in the chat, and we've got on Twitch we've got another 11. So let's say we got 20 people just for fun. All right, and we drop us all in the North American wilderness. Do we actually survive?
Right.
Some of us may have some knowledge, but I'll bet you even in that group, we don't have enough knowledge to restart civilization. Right? And this is a pretty well-educated group. And so it's not entirely not that.
Right. Who probably had some time to do some homework before they left, Nargothrond as well, right? I mean, they knew they were heading out to the frontiers. So.
Right. Exactly. And maybe they checked in with the Haladin and brought along a couple of specialists to kind of help them out for a little while.
Possibly, yeah.
But, yeah.
But it's still pretty rough. It's still pretty rough.
Yes.
And Andreth is still holding the line, as is emphasized in the very first plot point here, still holding the line on, we want to figure this out for ourselves, right? We want to we don't want handouts from elves to, help us get through, to save us here. That's the whole point, is we're trying to make it on our own. Though you've got to think a significant portion of her people are going to be seriously doubting that this was such a good idea after all by the time they get here, right? The teenagers are now like, okay, I could do with one fewer bonfires now, come to think of it, right? Maybe maybe things weren't so boring in Nargothrond after all. It's... What kind of relationship, it raises the question for me, what kind of relationship do we see with Andreth and her people? Like, has her leadership survived that strain well? Is that something? Because, there's got to be strain. It's not quite, Haleth in Nandun Gortheb strain, right? But it's got to be the second most, right, of all of the, of this kind of strain that we've seen in this whole season. It's going to be a really, really challenging transition, and especially to be like, for elves to be showing, you're kind of in deprivation, trying to figure things out, right? And these elves show up with gifts, and Andreth is like, no, we're good. No, thank you. Like, seriously, that can't be a wholly popular decision at that point, right?
Right.
Maybe just give us a little bit of the dependency on elves, for now.
Right, especially because they are kind of rolling into, in that first scene, they're rolling into winter. One of the things that we did was basically show the passage of time over the course of this episode. So we showed the seasons passing to kind of help cement that in the eyes of the audience.
Right.
Along with everything else. And so, yes, there's probably some grumbling. There's probably a little bit of other stuff going on. It's not the point of the story that is happening on screen here, but there definitely would be background stuff that's going on.
Yeah. Okay. But we're going to see her be... So I'm one of the reasons that I'm kind of pressing on this a little bit is that I want to make sure that we have that dynamic clear in our heads, because by the time we get to the end of the episode, Andreth is ready to desert, right? She's ready to walk away from the whole thing. So I'm trying to make sure I understand, like, what does that mean? What are the full dynamics of that? Like, what does it mean to her? To how much of a sacrifice? Because if we're not careful, right, it could easily look like, well, this sucks. Like, I want to go off on, I want to go off on my, a honeymoon with like the elf hunk instead. It could look like a real, less of a sacrifice and more of a defection, more of an abdication on her part. Right. And that would really undermine her position, I think, if we're not careful.
There are definitely, so there are preparations that she makes towards the end of the episode that are specifically addressing some of that stuff. She's preparing the people for a change in leadership. But I would say that generally up until the latter third of the episode, people's response to her has been generally positive, because while their life has been hard, their kids always have stuff to do, right? Nobody's burning anything down. Like, people have to be aware of the fact that
you have to admit you're not bored, are you? Right.
Yeah. But that their young people are clearly thriving in a way that they weren't before. Like, I think of this every time that I bring my daughter out into the woods and let her run around in the woods like her namesake. Like, she is vastly happier doing that than she is hanging out in the house. Right. Now, granted, she's 2. She doesn't understand the fact that,
she doesn't have to forage for her own food.
Without me there, she's dead meat running around, right?
Right. But yeah, so essentially, we're wanting to show that yes, it's a struggle. Yes, there are difficulties, but actually the people really are happier. Like in general, if we were to poll the House of Bayor at this point, they would still say, "Yep, we're glad to be here. It's rough. It's very different. We're still not good at this, and we all might die over the winter. But, I still give it 2 thumbs up, right?"
Yeah. Well, I mean, I brought up the Plymouth colony earlier,
Right.
but statistically, like the people of New England were taller, lived longer, and were better educated than the average person where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how much of that has to do with the kind of people who were coming over, I don't know, but
Right.
that says something,
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. So I think it would, and obviously many of these things don't bear. I mean, like we're not going to have scenes and dialogue showing this, but it does, if we think about the background, and again, most importantly, it bears on Andreth and her role, right? Her context, really, because it matters a lot. I mean, if she's on one extreme, she could be, loving the things with her people and her people loving her. And so her stepping away from that be viewed as clearly an enormous sacrifice on her part. On the other end of the extreme, she could be getting out of Dodge one step ahead of the lynch mob, if everybody hates it and decides that, this is not the life they signed up for.
It was always a danger when we decided to tell this story the way that we've told it.
Yeah.
If it had been anybody other than Andreth, who was the super gung-ho, let's move out of Nargothrond to Ladros, like if anybody else had been the main voice behind that, we wouldn't have that problem.
Right.
But because of the way that we've chosen to tell the story, we have to be pretty careful about that. And so it's very important that we make sure that people have accepted this path, right. that by and large people are not in like open rebellion or something like that, and that she doesn't look like she wants to get away from this,
Right. Yeah, it's definitely not a take me away from this too hard life kind of situation. But of course, the other thing that we have to manage with the Andreth and Aegnor relationship is the sort of obvious rank hypocrisy of the whole situation, right? Miss, I am the poster child of getting humans out from dependent relationships with elves, and now I'm going to abandon my people and run off with an elf. Right. I mean, and she's too smart not to be conscious of this irony, right? I mean, like, surely she's conscious of that irony. I would even think it would almost have to come up. And I mean, like we're almost setting up for it in that very first scene with her emphasizing to him, we can't rely upon the elves. We need to be independent of the elves. And then later on, oh, by the way, and I'll leave my people and be with you instead, is a huge shift, right, from that. And we need to. So how are you guys conceiving of that shift? Is this a like, this comes upon her and she's like, it's a war between my feelings and my principles kind of situation, or how do we see it?
So there's a few things. Like, one, this is kind of snuck up on her, right? She wasn't looking for this. She didn't fall madly in love with him at first sight or anything like that. But when he comes back, she is wearing the shawl that he gave her, right? And she is visibly excited to see him. And then she's like, wait a minute, why? Why? What is this all about, right? Because we talked a lot about like what would have happened had she not met Aegnor. Right? Is the leader for people going to find some dude to like what would her life have looked like?
One almost has to think, right? Wouldn't there be some dude among the House of Bayor who's like the obvious go-to? Everybody assumes that she's probably going to marry him at some point. I mean, wouldn't that
Right.
be the? Because I mean, it's not like they're on the frontier. There's not she's going to play the field, right? I mean, there's no one in the
Right.
fields, right? It's just them. So it's got to be
Right.
unless she meets somebody from among the Haladin on the way in. Right, I mean, there could be a Studley young aurochs hunter or something, who like is looking
The
at
guy
her
who
with a
saved her
wild
life, for
surmise.
example.
Yeah, for example. I mean, that's why I was thinking about that. And so maybe people are like, okay, there could be rumors of like a union between their peoples, which, hey, that sounds like a good idea. But okay, but fine. But it would seem like there's got to be a candidate, right? I mean, she's the lead. She's 28 years old, right? Which is, I mean, she's the leader of their people, so like she's been busy and such, especially over the last few years. But I mean, it's well on to Marion time, right? I mean, it's got to. This has to have come up, right? It absolutely has to have come up.
So, but of course, we get into the issue of time. Screen time.
Right.
We have to get these people falling in love very quickly. Like if we had a couple of episodes to work on this, then yeah, that's definitely a story that we want to be telling.
Yeah.
But we don't have that kind of time. So the one of the choices that we started leaning towards was this idea that it wasn't something that was prevalent on her mind, because she's super busy. She's doing all of this stuff. Right. And there's like, obviously there's different expectations for men and women in leadership, right? Because the reality is, in this scenario, if Andreth is a man, then he marries some girl, has babies with her, she takes care of the babies, he goes off and does the thing that he does his job.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody expects him to be involved that deeply in the raising of his family, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just the reality of that situation. That's not great, that's not healthy, but that's what happened for millennia, right? But the expectations for her are going to be different, right?
And it's one of the interesting consequences of her own choice, right? I mean, they've had a female leader for a long time back in, Nargothrond. But it's a different world out here, right? And it's,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One imagines that Avnel had a lot less to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, Andreth's kind of got to be everywhere, checking in on everything all the time. Avnel walked into a completely sustaining system.
Right. Part of the problem was there was nothing for the leaders to do. Yes. Yeah, there are very few problems to resolve, just the occasional bonfire to put out. And yeah. No, I hear that. No, it's not that I think it's going to be weird that she's not married. I'm just saying, nor am I suggesting, by the way, that we need a whole kind of backstory. I was just indulging in the same kind of question that you were saying about like thinking about what Andreth's path would have been, right? And thinking about that question led me to think like there has to be at least the potential, right? I mean, even if she's not thinking about it, other people are, right? And I think there are even ways to kind of incorporate this totally non-verbally, right? Like for instance, like there could be a dude whom we never even meet, right? But who has like eligible bachelor written across his forehead, right? Standing near her when she first meets Aegnor, basically, right? That like, I don't know. I mean, like it's just
he runs up with like a little bouquet with flowers, sees her meeting Aegnor, and goes,
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Or, you know, he's yeah, right. Coming up with some gift made to look very inadequate by the gift of a Noldor lord at that moment. No, I'm not suggesting we bring him that far into the story. I'm just saying, just it's sort of enough to suggest. I guess what I want to, the thing that I'm sort of, if I'm pushing for anything, what I'm sort of pushing for is I want there to be some kind of sense of what is the life that she's leaving behind, right? You know, what does it mean when she offers to go away with him? What exactly does it mean? One of the things that it means clearly is her abdication of her leadership position with her people. And I like the fact that we show her kind of preparing for that, right? The people don't realize that she's preparing for a transition, an imminent transition, right? They think it's a very eventual transition that she's preparing for. So I like the fact that she's not, you know, we show her planning this, we show her taking a long-term view and not just saying impulsively, I shall throw everything away and run off with you no matter what happens to my people. I like that. But even that doesn't necessarily show sacrifice fully. And there's sacrifice involved there. But do you see what I mean? Like, again, like, what life is she turning away from? And because, again, I keep coming back to, I keep saying the word sacrifice because I feel like I want it to be a sacrifice. Right? I want, when she offers to run away with him, I would want our viewers to really understand that she's not trying to better herself. This is the problem with because she's marrying up, right?
Right.
She's marrying up. She's marrying, you know, it's like marrying into wealth, except much more than marrying into wealth, right?
Well,
it is marrying into wealth also.
Marrying into wealth. He's a prince, right? But it's important to note that she's not running away to live in his palace,
right?
In Dracula.
Yeah.
Like, she's trying to get him to run away with her off into the wilderness where their life is not going to be easy. It's actually probably going to be a lot harder than the life that they're currently living. Right. And let's be real, okay? We remember the relationship between elves and nature and humans and nature. Like, she is not going to be able to pull her weight at the same level as Aegnor in that situation. Right.
Not to mention the fact that, you know, just thinking about the differences in what they can physically endure, right? Yeah. You know, she's all going to be like, so let's make a shelter. And he's like, why? Right?
It's a beautiful snowy evening.
Exactly. Why do that? Let's just roll around in the snow. Why not? Like, this is enjoy nature and all of its manifestations. Yeah.
Sheesh, you're eating a lot, woman. Like,
right. You need to eat every day? Wow. Okay. That's all right. Yeah. Yeah. Boy, and that cut that you got 2 weeks ago is still not healed? Like, oh my goodness.
Like, what is this infection thing you speak of?
Exactly. Yeah. Why do you keep sneezing like that? So yes. No, all kinds of problems.
In for trouble. Now, whether or not the audience is going to understand that,
right?
So what we could do is, when he's trying to get out of the situation, is have her first try to appeal to how impossibly difficult this life that she's asking for is going to be. He's going to try to appeal to her self-preservation.
Okay.
Right. But of course we know that that's not going to work, because it never does in these situations. Like, no. In stories, nobody actually cares about their own self-preservation.
Right. But again, I mean, I do like the emphasizing, as I said, I like emphasizing sacrifice, you know, in that she is giving up a lot. And not only comforts, right? But how...
Is there a way to convey that what she's giving up is like the life that she chose in previous episodes, you know, because The worry I
Yeah,
have
but
is if
but this is the first time we've seen her in that life, so like that doesn't bias very much.
yeah.
What we could lean on into is maybe like the respect of her people. Like if she just runs out on them, like what are they going to think about her? You know,
Which can certainly come up in response to him saying, I've got to, pull my weight in the siege, right? My brother
right?
is
I have to
here,
do
and
my
I
duty.
have to do my duty here in the siege, and that's a softball for her, right? Like I got a duty too,
Right.
and that's and I'm talking about giving that up. So what about you? But yeah, Dave, I mean, I'm kind of thinking the same thing. I mean, because
well, I
it's even
wonder
like I said, there's
if
like the hypocrisy issue, right? She's compromising
yeah.
her principles.
I mean, is there a way to communicate the idea that like if she runs off into the wilderness with Aegnor, that she's going to be basically utterly dependent on him, in the sort of in kind of a microcosm of the life that they previously had when they were living with the elves. Whereas right now her life's difficult, but at least she's like not depending on elves; she's depending on her own people and that kind of
Right.
thing. I don't know. It is very abstract. I feel like if what we put on screen is like what she's giving up is a potential good looking suitor over here and this thing over here, like I don't know, that feels a lot less Tolkien-y to me. That feels like
Mm-hmm.
the kind of thing you would see in pretty much any story. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeking for something different that
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think
Marie's suggesting a parallel to Aradel and Ale. I don't.
hmm.
Hmm. Parallels to Aeol and Arthel are always disturbing.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. I don't know what.
But that sounds like fertile ground, given that it'd be great if there were parallels that were like literally happening on screen this season.
Uh, the isolation.
Arthel's
Okay.
isolation.
Can we just give her a
Right.
best friend?
So wait, so I can hang on a second. Okay, so Maria, I think I'm tracking with you. Basically, the parallel you're suggesting is that if Andreth does leave everything and run off with Aegnor, then she is a parallel to Arethel being isolated with Aeol, right? I mean, it's by her own choice and she's initiating it. And yet, nevertheless, this idea of instead of achieving your goals and being a part of things as Arethel intended to be a part of things, now instead she's off in isolation, accomplishing nothing, constrained. And yeah, exactly. So that basically,
And her life doesn't have purpose anymore.
and her life doesn't have purpose anymore. Exactly. So Andreth would be losing her purpose. 'Cause this is what I keep coming back to, like the way, as I say, like the way in which her desire to run off with him it's not exactly hypocrisy, but it's like this close to hypocrisy, right? She was the one who, and she was right? She was right and Finrod acknowledged that she was right? She convinced Finrod that she was correct to say, this isn't good. This is not how people should be. We need a purpose. We need a reason to be. And now she's saying, and I'm going to leave that all behind, right? Like let's cheerfully abandon that purpose entirely and run away together instead. It's got to ring a little bit, not false, but I mean, like, I don't know. To me, it's always kind of a pretty serious red flag, right? I mean, like if somebody says, I'm willing to compromise my principles for you, it's like, well, hang on. That's uncomfortable, right?
I mean, the reality is that she can be wrong. It's okay for her to be wrong.
Right.
In this circumstance, like, and Aegnor can say, look, you might say this now, but like, are you going to look back at your life and still think that that's true?
So, are we in the end going to basically show she is the impulsive, emotional, weak one, and he is the strong one who sticks to his principles and says, no, it would not be right. It would not be right for us. It would not be right for you. So I'm going to nobly ride away and do the right thing, even though you are not doing the right thing. Like,
Well,
sort of,
kind of,
kind of.
but he's put them in this position, right? Because he's the one who has said that we can't be together in this circumstance,
Mm-hmm.
right? He gives her no other option but
Okay.
running away together, right?
Okay.
That's the only option he leaves her with. And when it comes down to it, he's not willing to make the sacrifices that she's willing to make that happen. She's
Good.
like, fine, I'll give everything up. I'll give everything up.
Right.
Even my own reputation amongst my people. They don't actually need me, but they're still going to feel aggrieved by this.
Right.
They don't actually need me because I've set it up so that they don't need me.
Right.
But I'm willing to give all that up, and yet you're still going to ride away from here, leave me standing in the snow.
Right. So one of my problems here that I'm having is that I skipped the middle of their story, basically, right? Which is where, so it's not like my concern is I want to make sure it does not look like, in as much as there is fault here, right? That it's all hers, like that he is the one acting nobly and clearly, and she's the one who's acting poorly or making bad decisions, bad impulsive emotional decisions. Right. The bit that I'm skipping is that he is the one who said, so like things were proceeding naturally, as in a way that was a surprise to both of them. He didn't come here planning to romance this human woman. She was not in that frame of mind either, right? This was not her attitude towards elf lords. I mean, if anything, she would have been, she's good friends with Finrod, right? Like, there was, and she would expect, and these are actually his brothers, right? So, I mean, it's like she would not be kind of worried about that. There was no romantic tension with Finrod. Like, everything was fine. She knows how to categorize this. And so it surprises both of them, right? Kind of proceeds naturally. And then they sort of realize that they're in love with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a question of like, and now what do we do?
Now what happens? It's interesting because right up until that point, the point where they start having that kind of more philosophical discussion, this kind of storytelling, I will confess, is outside of my area of expertise, right? It's never been my strong suit. So
I mean, the sappy romances, specifically,
no, it's not really my thing. I mean, I typically have gotten them wrong in my own life. Why would I get them right on paper? Right? Nick does not write rom-coms. Yeah, that's so. What I did do was because I know there's a formula for rom-coms, so I went and I looked it up. Right? I did my research, and I looked at the plot points of a romantic comedy. And the story basically follows that formula until they realize, oh, what do we do now? Right?
Right.
We start at the meet cute, then the realization, like all that stuff happens, and then, oh no. Scandal, as Brian says.
Scandal.
Right?
But this is like an ontological scandal, right? This is not like a Montagues and Capulets kind of situation, right? This is not I mean, this is a
they don't even know if it works physically.
Again, unprecedented. Like it's never, ever, ever happened in the history of the world.
It literally isn't done.
It's literally not done. Yes, it certainly never has been. So yeah. I mean, it certainly is. It's on a very different level, right? On a very different situation. And
don't you bring up those names, Marie.
Right. I will. That's why I didn't hate it. That's why I didn't hate the Toriel Kiwi thing. There's a lot to hate about those films, but that's why I didn't hate it like so many other people did. Because in fact, like that kind of situation, like two apparently totally, I actually thought that the idea of like an elf dwarf romance, which is really awkward. Like people like to look at things like Beren and Luthien and imagine that this is like, you know, the two predestined lovers, you know, meeting each other. Like, I'm telling you, to Thingol, Keely would not have looked weirder than Beren. Like, it would not have been more deviant. And so I actually liked that element of the Toriel plot lines. I mean, it's the whole love triangle was so poorly done, and it was super awkward and amazing. But again, and like just the whole concept of an elf and a dwarf falling in love, I actually thought was actually in keeping with many of these things, and kind of strikes truer, recovers in a sense the sense of alienness, the sense of strangeness. Like, if it creeps you out, good, because like you should be creeped out by Beren and Luthien. Like Thingol was creeped out by Beren and Luthien. You know, it should feel similar. So I kind of like the fact that it sort of gave a way to recover that. But anyway,
right. I mean, given that Thingol himself is in an interspecies relationship,
I know,
I would think
right?
that he would be a little bit more understanding.
Come on, I mean, yeah, like exactly. Maya to elf is like way bigger gap than elf to dwarf. I mean, seriously, there's nothing that compares to that. You know,
that is easily the most awkward pairing in all of the entire Legendarium. But we're never told to kind of look at that at all closely.
Yeah.
But it really doesn't work. There's a lot of things about it that really don't work.
It's challenging. It's challenging. Yeah, no, I agree. So I did always think that the outrage, like the, you know, inclination to laugh, to yell, you know, and I'm like, this is healthy. This is good. Like, work through this, people. Like, this is exactly what you should be working through with these interspecies relationships in Tolkien. But anyway.
My objection was never to the concept. Right. It was much more to the execution.
The execution. You know, that's what it's always about with the Hobbit films. But anyway, so and so how long does the middle go on? So like they get to the point where they're actually by Tarn Iluin, right? Which I love, by the way, that you know, by Iluin is where they get together. Let's have as much like happy tragic stuff associated with that location as possible. That's great. It's but anyway, so they have this moment, right, where they confess their love for each other. Like they really do. My question is, how long does this last? Right? How long is it between we're staring into each other's eyes by the romantic shores of the lake with, like, you know, blossom petals blowing around us and everything, right? You know, smooching long and tenderly, and then, like, you know, doing a horrible romantic montage, you know, like in Attack of the Clones. And then we realize that it's a bad idea. Right? Like, how long are they happy together is my question.
Right. So that's a very good question. So Marie is giving you a little bit more information, but maybe we can just quickly look at the breakdown here. In the first act, which basically takes place over the course of the winter, there's the point where they meet, and the second meeting where their mutual admiration starts. Then in Act 2, we're in the late spring, and she's mad at him, right? Because he hasn't been to see her in months, and like elves, right? But like,
by the way, like, this never gets old for me. It never gets old for me. This whole plot line, this whole motif we have going of elves being like, I'll be right back, and then they come back 5 months later and wonder why the humans are upset. Like, it never gets old. I love this every time we do it. And to do it in a romance context, right? You know, when he's like, I'll come right back to check in on you, and he comes back in 3 months and she's mad and he can't figure out why she's mad.
Right.
What's not to love? I love it.
Yeah. So the the beginnings of the secret love between them is in scene 7. So it's right before, as Marie points out, right before the midpoint. So before the act, like the big meeting that they're all going to have, where Andreth and Aegnor are going to be in the same room and with a bunch of other very important people, right? Like that happens, and they have decided to keep it secret just in time for that council meeting, right?
Okay.
But there's probably a little bit of googly eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's hard to keep that kind of chemistry under wraps, especially if it's relatively new.
Right, and Angrod twigs to it, right? He figures it out. He observes
I think he figures out that he figures out that something's going on.
Yeah.
Then it's in Act 3 after the midpoint that they start getting philosophical about it. They start talking about the war because they just were in the council talking about the war, right? So they are kind of blissfully happy without thinking about the future or the or what any of this means for basically one scene.
Okay, right, but it's also a couple months essentially in the timeline.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so this is we're just enjoying, like, acknowledging the fact that we're in love with each other now, and we're not really thinking about what's going to happen yet. Summer romance, but it's still the middle of July. That's where we are, right? Until the council.
So. Right. Basically, this whole process takes place over a year, right? Or maybe a little over a year, because they start out leading into a long winter, and then we end up like in the height of winter, essentially.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah. So, but it's basically the council that is the reason they're gonna start talking, right? So we have the
conversation, yeah.
Right. So we have we have fallen in love, sweepy music scene, right. Then the council scene, and then after that, the reality beckons. We got to figure out what happens now.
Yeah, like after the council, they kind of realize that they're not just a girl standing in front of a boy and all of that other stuff. That
right.
I don't even know. Like, it's part of the cultural zeitgeist. I can't even remember what movie that's from. Right. But I'm sure somebody will remind us.
Right, but they realize it's the big. So, and it's going to come up. Aegnor's going to bring it up, right? Because Andreth is still thinking we can overcome the obstacles, right?
Right.
She's like, we can, like, yeah, you've got your people and I've got my people, and there's a geographical thing, right? But we can figure it out. We can figure out. So she's basically like, let's get married, right?
Right.
She's like, let's get married, and there'll be problems, right? And your family is probably going to be upset, and I'm going to have a hard time looking Finrod in the face next time I see him. But let's do this, right? And he's going to be like, what? He's going to be like, yes, let's do this, but we're going to have to wait about 150 years, right? Or at least 50 or something,
right?
Right.
But that she doesn't have that kind of time.
Exactly.
She doesn't even have 50 yeyears.
Right.
Like in 50 years, she's going to be almost 80 years old. Like, that's not going to work.
Exactly. So that's where that's because he's not going to say, yeah, no, I can't. I shouldn't do the human thing. He's good to go. He's just doing the elf thing where he's like, yeah, but I can't. Obviously, we can't now, right? Like that's like physically impossible, right, to do that now. So all we have to do is wait until the siege is over, and then we can get married. Right. Which makes it sound really simple, and yet it's clear that and so this is where we want to lean on. This is where we want to lean on the him being inflexible, right? Like when her offer to throw everything up and run away with him is not like a plan, but a desperation.
That's not plan A.
Right. That's like, desperate. I am
Like, he's got
acknowledging
plenty
that
of
this
time.
is a
He
bad
could
plan,
totally
plan
just
B.
marry her and live with her there in Ladros,
Yeah.
and then go. Like, he's still right there, right?
Right. 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 Right.
Uh,
And the war might not even come, during her, and like, in her defense, it won't. How long is it going to be until the war comes? Decades, right?
Well, she'll be a pretty
She'll be
old lady
old.
by the time the
Yeah.
war comes. Yeah.
Exactly. So I mean,
And
and this is why
would
she's so
she-
bitter later on, because she's like, we
Right.
could have gotten married. Like, the war didn't even
Their kids
happen.
would have been adults.
Yeah, exactly.
Their sons could have rode into battle with him.
Yes.
And it would have been totally fine.
Absolutely.
They might have been getting a little on in years.
Right. Exactly. She'd have had grandkids before
Right.
before the war actually came. Right. So yeah. So this whole like, no, we're just gonna, like, not in a time of war. We're gonna wait for the. So okay. So let's then come the other direction. Right. She's 70 at the Dagor Bragollach, Maria's reminding us. So that's fully 42 years in the future from this moment. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So they are, in fact, they don't know they're going to have 42 years of peace. But of course, but here's the other thing. So on the one hand, I wanted to be cautious against making her look like, just like emotional, impulsive, and I'm going to throw everything away and I don't care. But at the same time, I want to be careful with him too, right? We can't make him sound completely oblivious. Like one of the difficult things to manage as far as his perspective is just this whole, like, that's not how elves do it. Right. And
Yeah.
that's going to be something that's going to be really hard for our audience to wrap their heads around. I think, like, how deeply ingrained this is, or how can we explain that? Because here's the thing, she's never going to get it. I mean, that's clear. That's explicit in the Athrobeth, right? Finrod goes there at the end of that conversation in the Athrobeth and tries to say, you got to understand, like, elves don't function that way. Like, we can't do that. And she's having none of it in the Athrobeth, right? She's like, yeah, whatever. We had decades, right? Don't give me that.
So let's ask this then. Why are the elves so unwilling to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why? I mean, are they so singularly focused that they just can't bring themselves to bring lives into the world while this other work is undone? Is that it?
Yes. I maybe it is. Or the other thing is that, like, the way, so in the context in which this comes up, in the laws and customs among the Eldar, which is in Morgoth's Ring, Tolkien is talking about this in the context of, like, what marriage means to elves, right? And how they, like, join their selves together, their spirits and bodies together, and, like, what it means for them to beget children, right? I mean, it's like a conscious act on their part.
Right.
I mean, it's both emotional. It's not just emotionally different. It's spiritually and physically different for elves. And so, to some extent, it does kind of seem to be, I think I would. That seems as good a way to explain it as any. Like, that kind of, like, when you get married, when two elves get married and have children, they are, like, that's a project they are dedicating themselves to. Like, they are binding themselves, heart and mind, to that project of joining their lives together and bringing the child into the world and raising the child with the connections that, because remember, Tolkien is getting really philosophical here, right? He's talking about elf souls and, like the Thea and the Hroa, the spirit and the body, and, like, how so it's much more than just, this is our culture, right? And it's much more than just, this is how we feel about things, right? It's really because they simply don't operate the way that we do, right? I mean, like, two humans can sleep together and beget a child and not even realize that it happened, right? That's a very common thing among humans. That's impossible among elves. Like, they just don't work that way. And so
if they do that, then they are making a conscious choice to bring a child into a
Yes.
less than optimal. I was going to bring up Muriel. Marie brings up Muriel having to wait and wait and wait to have a kid.
Yes.
But I was thinking about the amount of effort that Muriel puts into her pregnancy, and that's not just something we made up. I know that we
No.
definitely accentuated that, but we definitely hammed that up a little, but that is there in the story.
No, exactly. I mean, it's look, I mean, Muriel is like the embodiment of bad data point, in elf history. Like, you can't judge anything by Muriel because no story in all of elf history is the story of Muriel, right? However, one of the things that it demonstrates, right, is that spiritual connection between parent and child, which is just of a different order than, I mean, I don't care how awesome your baby is, right? When humans have babies, like, it doesn't take their soul like that. Like, it's just not, that's not how it works. I mean, you can have, it can affect you emotionally, it can affect you physically, but again, it's, not the way that her soul is knit with her son's, and it's just like that, it's different. So yes, I think that's
Could he reference her then to kind of lend strength to what he's saying?
The problem is it brings up the whole Feanor question. I mean, Feanor is such I mean, like I wouldn't want it to sound like, we don't want to like beget another Feanor by mistake or something like that. Which, I mean, nobody really wants to do that. I don't think you can. But anyway, but yeah, no, exactly, Marie. Postpartum depression is very real, but Muriel wasting away is a very unique data point. It's just, it's not on the same level as postpartum depression. It's just a completely different phenomenon. But anyway, the point is that I think what we want to try to do justice to Aegnor, right? It's not just in my culture, we never do it this way, because that just makes him simply inflexible. Right. She's willing to bend. Right. Well, in my culture, we do it, different ways, too. But hey, let's meet in the middle. Like, what's your damage? Right. But again, if what he tries to convey to her and fails to convey to her, because again, in the Athrobeth, it's clear Finrod is still trying to explain it and she's still having none of it. Right. Is that it's like, no, like, you don't understand. Like, I can't do it. Like, he would have to. It would. I mean, he would have to. So I think maybe, Nick, that your idea of saying, like, I can only sort of do one thing at a time is maybe a better, I mean, that just makes him sound really limited, right? But which is perhaps not the greatest effect in the end. But what he would be having to try to explain to her is that it's not that he doesn't want to, it's that he can't. And when he says, I can't, she would hear, I won't, right? Or I'm unwilling to, or like, that's a sacrifice. That's a line I'm not willing to cross. Right. So I'm going to say I can't. But he means I actually can't. Like, I would have to, like, in a time of war, when we are focused on, defending our people against, an attack from Morgoth, I am not capable of being in that physical and spiritual place that I need to be in order to bind myself to a wife and to children. Like, it's my apparatus does not facilitate that. Elves cannot multitask in that way.
Humans actually have an interesting reaction that I read about, interestingly, a couple of years ago, right? And that's that. So women have a reaction, a hormonal reaction to pregnancy and childbirth that rewrites a lot of their behavior in a lot of ways. What's really interesting is that if if uh, if the father spends a lot of time with the child after immediately after the child is born, he also has his behavior rewritten, which is really interesting. And I wonder if elves that's accentuated, because like he talks about elfin women when they become mothers, it changes them physically to the point where they're not able to do the sorts of things that they would normally do. And I wonder if there's at least a temporary response like that for elvish males as well.
Well, I mean, yes, in that, I mean, we are told that like he does talk about like how their two Fear, come together, and not just in the making of the baby, but like in marriage itself. This is why elves don't commit adultery also. Like, they're not tempted to commit adultery. In fact, the only times elves have ever been tempted to commit adultery have been when they're already really corrupt. Like, they're naturally monogamous in this way. They're not inclined to stray. And anyway. It's one of the what? Sorry?
I said Finway.
Well, see, no, bad data point. Bad data point. That's why Finway and Muriel shall never be brought into a discussion of normative elvish behavior. But anyway, yeah. So it's like he said that this is just kind of how they are. Marie was asking, so like, do elven soldiers forget that they have wives? I don't think they forget they exist, right? But it would not surprise me, for instance, if probably too much detail, but it would not surprise me if elvish husbands and wives do not sleep together during time of war. Like, they're still married, right? But what Tolkien also says, after marriage, it often happens that like in years after they get married, there will be long seasons in which like the two of them will be undertaking different things. Like they'll be, learning something or undertaking a new project, and they'll live apart for a really long time. Like Galadriel and Celeborn, when Celeborn goes to Rivendell and Galadriel goes on the boat, right? Like they don't go together, but like it's, anyway, like this happens, right? He says that this, but it's a normal sort of phase of thing. And this is what, more than anything else, Nick, it's that part of Tolkien's description of elvish marriage that makes me think of that like non-multitasking thing as a reasonable way to kind of try to make it graspable, right? It's not that they cease being married. It's not that they forget that they have husbands. It's, husbands and wives. It's not that they don't forget each other. They don't forget their relationship. But there will come seasons in their lives when they're not, like, that's not the thing they're doing anymore, and so they'll go off and do something else. But I do think so, like the whole time of war thing, right? The whole time is like, that is not the time for them to be doing the let's have a child thing. Right. The child conception and child rearing thing. It's not the time to do the let's now get married and, have our, our own union. Like, because again, when that happens, that's what they're doing, right? That's their project. That's the main thing.
Right.
So in that sense, like, no, I don't think they forget about it. But they don't, they're not, I mean, if they are being soldiers, I do think that a male elf who is being a soldier in the army is, in a sense, he's not on active duty when it comes to being a husband. He probably lives apart from his wife. Maybe she's there. Maybe she lives in the same place. And I think that's nothing against the way that we've shown husband and wife teams like Ethelos and Angrod back in the beginning of season 4, right? Working together in the context of war. That's fine, right? But see, even there, right? One would imagine in this point of view that Angrod and Ethelos are primarily operating not exactly as husband and wife, but more as
partners.
Yeah. Like they're, soldiers and captains together there, and they still work together, and they still love each other, right? And they're still married. But that's the thing that but both of them were doing it, right? So they were able to work together, just as Galadriel and Celeborn are both doing we're ruling Lothlorien thing, in the Third Age when we meet them in the Lord of the Rings, right? Anyway,
Okay.
So I think we can try, but trying to convey, like, what we're actually going to show on screen, right, is going to be Aegnor attempting to explain this and failing, right?
Yeah, like, and here's the thing: is like he can explain it badly in a way that the audience doesn't understand until Finrod explains it later. So maybe we can leave it to Finrod to at least get enough of it out so that the audience can understand. Andreth is too blinded by her own bitterness about the fact that she got stood up in the snow, right? But Finrod can kind of lay it out, right? And Aegnor can say something to the effect of, look, like, I couldn't be a husband for you, and I couldn't give you a child. Like, those things he can say.
Right. And she's not going to understand why not. Because, again, like in human culture, the time of war, like right before the battle, is a very popular time for making babies, right? I mean, that's kind of a thing.
Feel alive.
Right? That's kind of a thing, right? So yeah, that would not make any, especially since, like, he's a boy, right? So like why can't he give her a baby and then go off to war? Like, that's how it works, actually. Like, that's normal. Like, what does he mean when he says he can't do that? Like, what?
So we probably should have in our heads the answer to this question: what would have happened if he had stayed with her in Ladros and been her husband for that 42 years? What would have happened in actuality?
I think in actuality, they would have had an awkward. Well, I don't think it would have worked out. I think she would have felt spurned because, like, I think he would have. Okay, so first of all,
we have to maybe not get too technical about this.
No, I mean, we can't. We don't need anatomical illustrations or anything, But seriously, like, I think they would have lived like a largely celibate relationship, like, because he's doing the war preparation thing, right? And he could have, and again, we had Angrod and Ethelos as a model, right? Yeah. That maybe is available, right?
That's best case scenario.
That's best case scenario. That she has a role, right, as leader of her people, and he has a role as, like, neighboring elf lord who is helping to marshal and to lead his people, who are their close allies and relatively near neighbors, right? And so therefore the two of them could work together affectionately in partnership, like Angrod and Ethelos were working together affectionately in partnership with commitment and everything, right? I mean, it's not, I wouldn't want anybody to think that I'm suggesting that, like, when Angrod's wife dies, he doesn't particularly care because he wasn't in the wife mode, when that happened. Like, it's not about that. They're still committed to each other. They still love each other, but that's, like, being together, especially in a baby making environment, is not where he is. It's not where he's going to be. So, and I think that she would not really get that. And so, Marie, exactly. She would have become really uncertain about whether or not he ever loved her at all. I have to think that the relationship that they would have had would have been one that she felt was, like, not a real marriage. And I'm not just talking about their physical intimacy. I mean, in all ways. Like, he wouldn't be able to do both. He can't be for her, which makes the falling in love really interesting, right? Yeah,
that he can do that.
Exactly. How far can he go, and why can he go there, right? And this is why it would surprise him, right? I would think.
So this is why, one of the reasons why, because, like, we've talked before about how, like, one of the only things that seems to motivate people to move against cultural taboos, like the kind of thing we're discussing, is overwhelming physical attraction, essentially, right? but that's probably not what he's experiencing.
That's like the opposite of this. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like, she kind of might be experiencing that, but he's not.
He's not.
And yes, he probably does find her attractive and whatnot, but that's not really what's getting his attention.
And by the way, I forgot who we cast as Aegnor, but talk about your acting challenges, right? I want you to have real chemistry with this woman on screen, except you can't act like you are overwhelmed with physical desire for her, because in fact, you're not. You're not, in fact, at all tempted to sleep with this woman, but you are overwhelmed with love unexpected to you that is like leading you to this place. But you actually, literally, physically do not have any desire to sleep with her. So please act that now. I mean, I have no idea how I would do that.
Outside the human experience, I don't think that it's.
I know
like,
it's
males don't really work that way.
I know exactly. It's super weird, but that's exactly it. That's so. I mean, so again, let me. Coming back to like, why does this happen with him, or what's going on in his mind, right, or in his body, even, right? Imagine if she were an elf, right? Presumably it has happened on more than one occasion that two elves meet and fall in love in a time of war, right? So what happens? What do? They realize that they love each other. They may realize, like, yes, you are the partner for me. I want, like, what Aragorn and Arwen do, right? Where they get betrothed on Caer Amroth and then say, okay, when the war is over, if the war ends, and we're not dead, then we'll get married. Right. That's pretty much, I think, what elves would do. And that's what he's expecting. He wasn't expecting with a human, obviously. Right. But so I don't think falling in love would be counterindicated on like the physiological level. But as you say, it's not like physical desire that's driving him at all. It's like, I respect this woman. I think that she could be a good partner for me. Yeah, she's human. I realize that's weird and totally unprecedented. And my brother is kind of pressuring me about this, but I'm going to push back against my brother here because she's really great, right? Andreth is great. And I think that she would be a good partner for me. So this is great. So we're going to, so let's do this. And she's saying, Andreth is saying, let's do this. The problem is doing this looks completely different for the two of them. It's not like one of them wants it and the other one doesn't. They both want it, right? But for him, wanting it means, excellent, we've made an arrangement, right? We agree that we both love each other. So as soon as the war is over, in 10, 50, 150, 450 years, we'll get married, right? And then we'll do the romance thing and we'll do the baby thing and it's going to be great, right? And we'll both look forward to that. And she's like, no way. And so for her, what doing this thing means is let's make it work and get married now. And of course, again, like the reason she's going to be so bitter later on is that she has every reason to think that she was justified, right?
Right.
Because it's going to be, in fact, 40 years. She's going to be a 70-year-old woman when the war actually breaks.
And this, like, at this point, the audience is going to be 100% on her side. Like, I think the audience probably will be pretty upset with Aegnor when he rides away, and should be. It's been brought up in the chat a couple of times about romantic asexual attraction, which I'll confess I didn't think of when I made a couple of statements which would kind of preclude that. I would agree that that's probably closer to what it looks like. That's definitely outside of my experience, and and probably a lot of actors' experiences, I imagine. But that is definitely a thing that exists.
Yeah. I mean, so it's different from, I don't know. I mean, there are lots of Nick, I think what I would push to is right back to what you said about this is not really a human experience. Like, that's part of the point. Like, one of the things that I would hope that we could accomplish in describing this love story is really intimately come to understand this is literally an alien race. Like they're not just like super long-lived and unexpectedly beautiful humans, right? These people, this is a different species entirely. And that we just are not wired the same. Like we don't, and it's more than just, I mean, we've been kind of getting at that with the longevity thing, right? We keep coming across that with the way that affects the way that they look at so many things and everything, right? But it's not just that. If a human didn't die, they would still be wired completely differently from how the elves are wired. They're set up differently. And we've never really shown that. Like this is one of the places where we can, and it's a to do it so in this way, Nick, I go back to the romantic comedy thing, right? There's so much about this arc that looks familiar, right? That seems like this is, like we've heard this story 100 times, except you haven't, right? In fact, there's this superficial familiarity to it. And yet it's, at the end of the day, the story turns on, but they were two different species who could like barely actually interrelate and had wholly different spiritual and emotional makeups. And so in fact, could not even understand each other at the end of the day.
Yeah. You think for a minute that's the tale as old as time, but no, it's definitely not. This is a completely different tale.
Yes. And this is literally a tale never told ever before. In the case of Andreth and Aegnor, like, and that's, and it would be amazing actually to like convey that. Right. And yet the thing that we get at the end is she doesn't get it. Right. Andreth doesn't get it. At the end of the day, she feels like a jilted and betrayed lover. Right. He's been faithless. He has shown in the end that he was not willing to commit to her. He was not willing to.
She gave him every opportunity.
Yeah. Even to the point of going beyond where she knows she should go. She should not leave her people and run off with the elf lord instead. She knows she shouldn't do that, but she's willing even to go there. Right. And in extremis, when it seems like there's no other alternative, she proposes that. Right. And yet he won't even do that. And even of course, her own knowledge that it was not right for her, that would not have been a good thing for her to do, is going to fuel her bitterness, towards him.
I like also that this goes way beyond the whole like, you're going to watch her grow old and die, and then you're going to watch your children grow old and die, and your grandchildren are going to grow old and die. You're going to watch your entire line grow old and die as you are helpless to prevent it. Yeah. Right. And that's rough. Like that's a big ask for anybody. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But this goes well beyond that. It's more than that. It's that he literally just wouldn't be able to be a good husband to her.
Really a husband to her at all.
Right. And it's not right for him to have her leave her people behind and for them both to abdicate their duties. Like, there are a lot of things about this. Brian likes my understatement.
Right. It is rough. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
No, I agree, and I think it makes for a really, really interesting story, a really unusual love story, if we can succeed in conveying that. But it's a lot. And the other thing I was going to say though, in response to what you're saying about the children dying and everything, I like the fact that we have that conversation with Angrod in there. Right. Because one of the things that we're showing there is it's not about that. He's willing to go there. Right. Yeah. He understands she's immortal. He understands the implications. He's thought through it. And so we show him not in his conversation with her. Right. But we show him in his conversation with his brother. He's not just caving to family pressure. He's not just, unwilling to deviate from his culture. He's not just creeped out by the fact that he's going to outlive her by millennia. He's, and is going to watch their, children for 100 generations grow old and die. He's willing to go there, right? He's willing to take that on, even though that is going to be rough, as you say. But that's in the end, that's not what causes the problem, right? He's willing to take that step. He just can't now. It's just bad timing. It's just bad time. It's just bad timing.
That's all it is.
That's all it is. If she could just wait for 50 years, I mean, apart from the whole he's going to die in battle thing, but, still, like, if she could, and then even that's would normally only be a temporary inconvenience, but obviously less so here. Anyway, I think that's very interesting.
Kind of ironic, isn't it? Because on the one hand, the root of it is this, like, the like alien nature, but also bad timing is like, that's like pretty much the most human possible, like, thing to happen in a relationship.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is. In the end,
I was going to say that this conversation is interesting because I think it will be challenging to portray, because, like, I don't think Jackson's films portray this at all.
No,
right?
Not at all.
They really just lean into the, like, he's going to die and you'll still be alive. Boy, won't that be a bummer.
Right.
And it really doesn't, like Jackson's elves are literally just long-lived, classier long-lived humans.
Yes.
With 20 years.
Yes.
And so I think in some
sense, who can leap tall falling buildings with a single bound.
Yeah.
Granted.
With excellent agility and balance.
Yes.
Cat-like reflexes.
Right.
And I think that introduces challenges, because I think, like, your typical audience, they're like, that's the story they're going to expect, and that's the kind of elves they're going to expect. So like being able to communicate like that, the really profound sort of, like, differences in nature is tough.
And that's why I feel I really love the way that we've been building up to this, those moments that we've given in just the fundamentally different attitudes and perspectives. And we've seen that from the unfriendship of the Green Elves and Galadriel's attempts there, to the interactions with Thingol and Beleg and Haleth, right? And the problems in Nargothrond. And, so there are lots of places where we've shown that, like, they're just not on the same cycles, and they're, have a really hard time understanding each other. But it's all been kind of building up to this, right? And we're here, we see it goes beyond that. It goes beyond mere, our cultures are really different. It goes well beyond, I have a hard time understanding how you think, and into, we're in fact different species who are put together differently. And that's really, sometimes just creates insuperable obstacles.
Yeah. We've shown in a lot of ways that they are so different on a spiritual level.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Galadriel, like the unfriendship with the Green Elves is a really good point, because the fact that murder is a fact of life for humans,
right?
When for elves, it's a horrifying thought to even comprehend.
Right.
Right. Like, look at what had to happen in order for it to happen at all.
Right.
And of course, when elves murder other elves, they do it at scale, right? They don't just murder that guy because they were looking at their wife, like, that's not. That's
one of my favorite Nick Palazzo quotes so far. When elves murder other elves, they do it at scale. I like that. No, you're right. They really show true dedication to concept when they take that step. It doesn't just happen. And of course, another way to say that is that the humans are always living closer to death than the elves. It's more of a present reality in their lives all the time. Such that even it's hard for them to comprehend, like, the whole, like, why the pigs are a problem, right? I mean, like, they trampled some bushes. Get over yourselves, Green Elves. Yeah. Like, come on, this is our lives, like, we're talking about.
Yeah, the Green Elves are like, do you really need 500 pigs? Like, is that absolutely necessary? There are pigs running around in the woods all the time. They don't cause as much of a fuss, but you have to have 500 pigs all in one place where they're easy to get to. What's that all about?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, no, but again, I think this is, so really, I see the two, this, and it's episode 11. That's the Athrobeth, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So episode 9 and episode 11 are really these two moments where all of this is brought into conflict, right? The conflict which begins unresolved right at the end of this episode with him, riding away from her. And it's not exactly going to get fully resolved, but it's going to get at least talked through in episode 11, right? So those two are kind of like the bookends of the real, like that's the real meeting of these two cultures that all of this has been kind of set up for in a way. And I love that. I love how that works. I think that's really, really cool. We should let's glance at the other plots.
The other two plots, there's not a huge amount of stuff there. So
right. I was thinking we could kind of cover them pretty quickly because actually let's go to the C plot because we already talked about that, which is the council in Dorthonion, right?
I love the way that Marie has phrased this. Fingolfin arranges a meeting in Dorthonion to discuss the siege because he doesn't appear.
Fingolfin doesn't appear. He sends Fingon.
Right.
Why? What's Fingolfin up to?
So he sends Fingon with his banner, with the banner of the High King, and Fingon at this meeting speaks for Fingolfin. He's not speaking as a captain of Fingolfin. For all intents and purposes, politically speaking, he is Fingolfin here.
Right.
He is the High King.
Okay. Which is doubtless going to make the Feanorians super happy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, fortunately, it's Fingon, right? So, Maedhros is going to be fine with this. But I'm only imagining, the looks that Caranthir and Curufin are exchanging during this. Since, they're not even cool with Fingolfin being High King.
Well, there's a reason why we didn't put them here, right? So Maglor is here as the representative of the Feanorians.
Right.
Mostly because
I forgot he was the only one there.
Yeah, Maedhros can trust Maglor to only say the things that he told him to say and not be a jerk to anybody.
Right.
Because
not start any sentences that begin with "yay, more," Caranthir would say. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And Maedhros would probably rather be here himself, but he's busy in another plot back at Himring.
Right.
So this also gave us a chance for Hador and Andreth to meet, which was great, and they have a little conversation. They have their little side conversation about how their cultures are dealing with the changes that they've been going through in their growth and whatnot, which was fun.
Is that going to be the beginning of sort of more interchange between the House of Hador and the House of Bayor? Are we going to get any of that, or any indication of that?
There will be.
Because we need to have marriages, right, sooner.
Yeah, in the next episode. So there are no Baorians getting married at the double wedding,
right?
As far as I understand, but Andreth and Barahir are both there, so we get to meet Barahir, who is being prepared to take on the kind of directional leadership of the Baorians. He's going to wind up, carrying around Baor's staff. And so we actually have, well, we'll talk about that at that point.
Later.
But let's save some of that.
Right. Okay. So, but wait, tell me again why Fingolfin isn't showing up.
Because Fingon he's grooming Fingon for the role of High King.
This is part of his hey, this whole groom your successor thing that the humans do is kind of a good idea.
Rad.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Right. Okay. All right. Okay. And what's the point of the council? What's the message?
So ultimately,
this isn't a strategy changing moment, is it? This is
not
tremendous meaning, right?
Right. So what they're basically going to get at in the at the point of this whole meeting, the end point of it, is that they have realized that Morgoth's forces can kind of get out around the sides of the siege. because of, for example, the attack on Haleth's people earlier in the season. So the eastern and western flanks are having a little bit of trouble, and Magor is basically like Mythros is like, I can build more fortresses. That's fine. I got plenty of help. I don't have anybody to put in them, right? I can't be everywhere. I don't have enough people to be everywhere.
So one of the things that this accomplishes is reminding us that although the Feanorians are quite fearsome in battle and have their cavalry and make really awesome fortifications, they're not in fact that numerous?
I mean, they can be pretty numerous, but they're not numerous enough to be everywhere. Like, there's not enough of them to basically stretch a line out from the mountains of Dorthonion all the way up to Eredluin and beyond, because that's how the orcs got out in the first,
So
earlier,
part of,
they went up and around.
Right. Part of what we're setting up here in having this discussion is drawing the viewer's attention to the fact that the eastern flank of the siege, although it has the Feanorians and their fortresses are individually really strong, there is weakness over there on the eastern front. And that we should not be surprised when you see it crumble later on.
Right. Well, and also we should not be that surprised when Mythros tells Fingolfin no.
Right.
In 2 episodes, when Mythros says, "Look, I don't have the manpower. I know you don't have the man. Like, I know that we don't have enough." Right.
So yeah. So we're establishing here that we don't even have maintaining the siege indefinitely is something we are arguably unequipped to do, even apart from ignoring the fact that he's a Valar and you can't really do that anyway. But it just like we're running short even just doing that. And so the idea of saying, hey, instead let's attack will seem like complete madness when it's already been established here in this episode that they're like, the siege is in fact, the leaguer is paper thin over here in places.
Now, of course, the real reason to have this council, the real reason, is to show how deep in their councils Anael is, so that when he returns to Mithrim and Thuringwethel comes and visits him at night, and we see flashbacks of that very meeting that we were just privy to, that we know that Angband knows that the elves are trying to shore up their flanks,
and probably failing.
Which is why they don't attack the flanks right away.
Right. Okay. So where you're setting up the tactics of the Dagor Bragalach and explaining why the tactics go that way.
Mm-hmm. And this is also, of course, the reveal that Anael is compromised.
Is compromised. Right.
And so anytime that we see Anael from now on, we know that whatever he's seeing is something that Angband knows about.
Okay. Can I ask a favor?
Uh-huh.
Can we show Anael opening the window before he goes to bed? The window that Thuringwethel comes through?
Yeah, that chump change.
Again, it's the Dracula reference, right? But it's an important thing in Dracula, which I think is really
the door for him.
The invitation thing, right? We don't need to belabor it, right? We don't need to belabor it, just because again, it's more than merely that she's not just stealing from him and he doesn't even realize it, right? He is being like suborned. There's his own will is being compromised here as well. And so that's why I want to kind of preserve I'm inviting the vampire into my room kind of Lucy Westenra thing.
Yeah, it's part of his like Manchurian Candidate programming. Is always open your window before going to bed, right?
Well, it doesn't even have to, like, there shouldn't be a good reason to open his window. In fact, it would be even cooler if it's like the middle of winter and he's opening his window and like
it is in fact in the middle of winter. That's
good.
True.
Excellent. Then he should open his window before he goes to bed in what looks like a totally puzzling and inexplicable move, only to find Thuringwethel coming in through that window, flying in through that window and yeah. Yeah, it's the Lucy Westenra thing. That's it. I just like to, and it's a very subtle, I know, but it shows, it points to.
It's an homage.
And yeah, it is that. But also, again, it's an homage which serves to point to the compromise not only of his mind but of his will. Yeah. Okay. So that we should certainly be starting to get really bad Ethelos feelings, which, by the way, I love the fact that we are recalling Ethelos and her compromise and death earlier in this episode with the conversation with Angrod, so that we can be all reminded about folks who have their minds compromised by Angband, to set up that at the end. So I like that a lot. Cool. All right. Right, the B plot, yeah. So the B plot is just about Maedhros attempting to recruit the dwarves, essentially. That's the essence of it. He's trying to recruit the dwarves to join the war effort and help him man these fortresses and stuff. And the dwarves aren't into it. They're just going to defend their own fortresses, right?
Right. And we do a little bit of fun things where Maedhros is learning, but Maedhros is learning stuff about the dwarves, right, which is critical because they're going to be part of the Union of Maedhros. So we have to get that that started. And so we brought up the whole Weregild thing again, but this time from the other direction, right? The last time we brought up the Weregild thing for the dwarves, well, that's not entirely true because last season we brought it up when Dys demanded Weregild from Gandalf for the death of her two sons, right, and her brother. Right. But in the main story, the last time we brought it up was when Denethor of the Green Elves was killed, and so the dwarves magnanimously offered the Green Elves a Weregild, like to make up for the fact that their king, like, oh, your king died. Oh, yeah, that's obviously terrible. We get that. That's a problem. So here's some money to make up for that. Right, and of course the Green Elves are being green. Super,
that is not their love language. They didn't get that at all. Yeah.
So Maedhros learns that in order to show accountability for the death of one of the workers in a construction accident, he is expected to give a Weregild to the dwarf's family. But despite his best efforts, they are not going to go along with the war effort, but they will remain on to help dig out the tunnels, which will come in importantly in episode 13.
Right, building secret tunnels in the mountain of Himring. Okay, cool, cool. No, I like this. I mean, a lot of this is going to not pay off for a long time yet. But I think it's good to say. I mean, I like the fact that we're already beginning to lay the foundations for the Union of Maedhros, especially since we're going to have Maedhros be arguing against the attack on Angband, which is always a little bit challenging because he's pretty gung ho in general about the whole let's attack Morgoth thing. But showing how, first of all, how he is very keenly aware of the impracticality of the suggestion at this particular juncture, and he has failed to recruit the help that he had hoped for. But yet, how we can see how down the road, right, he's going to change his mind.
Maybe if he had been successful here, he might have been in on Fingolfin's plan, and they might have gone ahead with it. With the dwarves helping them, they might have been able to get into Angband at the very least. And then maybe the fight with Morgoth is Maedhros and Fingolfin and Fingin and Caranthir and Curufin and Aegnor and Angrod versus Morgoth. And that feels like that would look a little different.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I like that. Yeah, Maria's reminding me it'll be, although there's only 17 years between the Dagor Bragollach and the Near Knife, but we won't get to it until season 7 because our storytelling is going to slow down in terms of years fairly quickly. But so it is a setup for something 2 seasons down the road. But it's going to pay off immediately in helping to helping to have it make sense, that even Mithros, right? Even, Mr. as one who returned from the dead, Mr. Living Flame Mithros is still going to be not really, keen on attacking Morgoth for some reason. So we see the reason why he's not. I mean, it's practical. Good. I like this. Plus, of course, as you hinted, with the dwarvish construction, setting up something that's going to be important in a few episodes when we get to the Dagor Bragollach itself. So, cool. Awesome. Good. Well, I think that is really exciting. I'm really excited about how this is one of those where I still feel kind of guilty. Like, I feel kind of guilty in the sense that the things that we were saying about the Andreth and Aegnor relationship today are really easy to say and really hard to do, both in terms of scripting dialogue and in terms of acting even more. But nevertheless, that's one of the fun things about this project, right? Is that we can say these things and then, don't have to try to figure out how to get actual actors to actually do it. But it's really interesting, and I love how it works into the whole shape of the season. Not saying that I think that, writing a script would be really interesting, very hard for this episode, but really interesting. But anyway, we didn't get to the frame, which is a trend that we've been maintaining. So I think we should keep our record intact there for now. What is clear is that we're going to need a catch-up frame session where we kind of go through the frame, maybe even looking at the whole thing. Brian
is also not shocked that we're not caught up on the frame.
Right,
like,
exactly.
What frame?
The
last discussion you had with Brian was during season 2, and it was specifically related to catching up on the frame when we had planned out basically an entire season of frame. Yes. And you guys finally realized, hey, maybe we should talk about the frame.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, no, I think in fact, it would be kind of fun. Maybe what we just do is when we finish talking about all 13 episodes, I'm imagining like a table, right? Where we have like the frame, like a, one sentence synopsis of what's happening in each episode. And then talking about the frame so that we can really see not only the whole flow of the frame story, but how it's interacting with the main thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's we're kind of headed in that direction. We might as well just kind of go whole hog on that, I think.
It's essentially like 1 or 2 hours worth of between 1 and 2 hours worth of television, the frame for the whole season. Right. So, yeah, it kind of makes sense to talk about in the context of like as an episode discussion.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I mean, it would be kind of fun to talk about it as we go along, but why fight destiny? So, all right, so we'll come back to that. So next time, don't forget.
We still need a name for Haradrim Christmas, by the way. So any language nerds out there, specifically Adonaic language nerds, it's been suggesting that Philip Menzies suggested one that I really like, which is the gifting, which I really like. My Adonaic is terrible, so I'm not going to even try to figure out how to parse that into an Adonaic phrase.
Okay. The gifting. The gifting. So that suggests we're still doing a Christmas-like gift exchange thing that's culturally attached to it.
While relating it to the giver of gifts. The giver of gifts.
Love it. Yeah, love it. Yeah. That's excellent. It's excellent. Okay, yeah. So we'll see if we can figure out some Adonaic there. All right. So our next session. Remember, we're skipping a week for Mythmoot, so we'll be doing some film stuff at Mythmoot, as I mentioned. But our next session will be on Thursday, July 1st. It is at a special time because we are going to have Hakan in from Europe again, and so it will be at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That is 3 p.m. Note, not 3 a.m. Eastern Time. That is 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Our last special session with Hakan was at 2 a.m. Eastern Time, as I recall, but this time time, it will be at 3 p.m. Eastern time on the 1st of July, Thursday, the 1st of July, to be talking about the casting results. So don't forget, you've got until the 27th of July, a little more than 2 weeks, to go in and cast your vote for casting for season 5. So I encourage people to go in there and check it out. Cast your votes, and we will see what happens, right? Look forward to discussing that next time on the 1st of July. Thanks, everybody, for joining us as always. And I will say thanks for listening and Godspeed.